Right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome again. So Mojaloop P11. So we're in the phase 4 dubbed as going live. So let's go into some of the core team updates that you were very excited to share with the and also ready for your feedback, which we can start taking into account. And as we have the voting and prioritization on day 5 and breakout groups will help shape our roadmap and what Mojaloop looks like in the coming days. So before that, though, wanted to break this down into 5 things. So we'll cover the first 2 items here. Let me use the spotlight here. We'll go through sorry. Give me one moment. So we'll go through the core team updates and version 1.1 changes and maintenance. We have a separate session tomorrow dedicated to the bulk transfers topic. And we have a session later today for the CCB updates and the testing toolkit. Of course, on day 5, we'll have the P11 roadmap. But before we go into the sessions, I was inspired by Paula's comment on first day to add some nostalgia to the discussion. So some of our contributors declaring victory in the Johannesburg convening after the phase 4 kickoff, and of course the entire community picture there. All right, we will have demonstrations from some of our other team members. We have Nico, who's the chair from the DA, who will come on board and talk about the DA updates. We'll have Valentin, Genev, Miguel, as usual, and Rajiv doing some demonstrations on a few other items here. So first we'll go over the overview of changes and progress, and then touch on some collaboration items. And then we'll go into the actual stuff, the focus areas for the core team, this PI. Before we go into that, phase 4, we've completed 3 phases so far in the lifetime of Mojaloop. As everyone knows here, just reminding, we're in phase 4, PI10, and we'll be stepping into PI11, starting the week after this, and then running through 3rd week of October. Of course, then we'll have PI12 after that. So from a use case perspective, we have the FSP interoperability API. We look at the switch functionality in three aspects. The first one is the FSP interoperability API use cases. As you can see here, so far until PI8, our focus has been on the P2P transfers, the peer-to-peer, which is the foundational use case for all of the switch functionality. So everything we covered in the technical overview, the 3-step process for the lookup or the discovery, the agreement, and the transfer phase we talked about in terms of P2P, because the resources that we need for P2P also support most of the other use cases here and are required. So we have payer initiated transactions covered, we have Payee initiated transactions covered, and now this PI, as you can see here highlighted, the bulk transactions is now covered as well. The switch supports bulk transactions as specified in the version 1.0. We had a POC version initially, which was done in PI 6.7, and now we have standardized that. We'll go into detail on that in coming slides. Again, we have 3 focus use cases: the P2P, merchant request to pay, bulk payments, as you can see here, which we covered in PI 10. The prepares, fulfills, and query, we had a POC version earlier. Actually, the get, we implemented it for the first time. And then we have the rejections, timeouts, and error endpoints implemented in PI 10. We'll see the demonstration on that, I think, tomorrow. This is a little bit loaded site, a loaded page, but we do use this for tracking progress every slide. If you go back to all our program increment slides, you'll see this slide everywhere, where we see what are the resources covered and where we are. What we see here is that the transfers is production quality, parties, codes, participants, and transaction requests, which cover the P2P and the merchant request to pay use cases. Our production quality and everything is good there. There is one thing we want to highlight here. We had some caching enhancements done to the transfers part, which came out of the performance testing and improvement efforts done in PI 9. And then you see some transition here in the put response on transfers and patch notification. So essentially these relate to, you can see the key here, these relate to the API 1.1 changes of the interoperability API. And we'll see a demonstration what the changes are again in the coming slides, but this is where we are now. The changes in PI 10 from PI 9 to 10 were on bulk codes and bulk transfers. Previously, bulk codes was not supported. Now we have it completely supported. Similar to the bulk transfers, now we have everything supported there. The switch functionality, the second aspect is the operations, or what some call as the back office API. So we have the operational use cases like onboarding and managing of participants, onboarding, managing of oracles for account lookup, and monitoring and tracing for hub operations, tech ops, customer care, and hub operator. So on our participants, we have capabilities to manage a participant and their characteristics like limits, callback URLs, thresholds. On the oracles for account lookup, we can have oracles for various identifiers like the oracle for adapter for Pathfinder, merchant registry, things like that. And then, of course, we have monitoring and tracing capabilities added for the transfers, codes, and account lookup, and then metrics as well. Oscar covered this in the Profana part, and we have a called APM dashboard, which we can use for end-to-end tracing, which I think we demonstrated in PI 7 or 8. Then the switch functionality, this is the third aspect, the settlements. We saw Rob and Michael discuss the settlement V2 aspect of it. From what different models need. We have settlement V1.0, which was there for a while now. And then the settlements V2, we have the settlement models designs all done. Settlement by currency is also available. The last two aspects, the interchange fees and continuous cross settlement, we have partially implemented. The work on that is still ongoing. We have the designs done, but the implementation is underway. Then we have the component architecture here for Mojaloop. Miguel, are you ready just to give a quick overview on our component architecture?
Yeah. Yeah, so throughout the course of the day, course of this presentation, you'll be hearing about several updates on some of these key components that are listed in this component architecture diagram. So this is just to give a key overview in terms of all the components that we have at the moment. It's not an exhaustive list. As you already heard, we already have some potential new components like the K8s operator or the patcher, etc. So there's a whole bunch of slew of other stuff, and you also hear about the PISP stuff. So this is not in all senses complete. But as those become more mature, they will be added to this picture. So basically, we have the main components, which is in the box called core components, and that is the main focus of the open source Mojaloop, let's say, capabilities. Inside there, we have all the microservices that basically provide the main functionality of the API and the specification, specifically around the account lookups, the transfers, which you can see are broken up into many smaller pieces, including things like the ML API adapter, as well as the handlers, which are able to process the individual stages of a transfer. And we also have the quotes as well. And further on that, we also have the, go next, please. We also have the transactions, and we also have the components for the bulk transfers as well. As many of you, if you were part of Monday's technical overview, there was already a more detailed discussion about them there. So if you kind of want more information about it, please go there and view that recording. I think it would be useful if you're interested more in the technical side of things. And then in addition, we also have some supporting components, and that's basically things like the settlement engine that we have, as well as other key components that handle some of the event processing and the email notification, etc. We also have some event sidecars, which are components that are used for also capturing logs, errors, and audits, etc. So basically in the support components box is where all those things go. I would say one of the let's say also the important parts, maybe more to FSP side of things, is also the scheme adapter, which is also in that area, which of course has already been mentioned a couple of times today. Then moving on to the quality assurance box, that's where we have a slew of, let's say, our QA functionality and operations, which include things like functional tests, scripts for onboarding of FSPs, as well as simulators, both from a hub and from a FSP perspective. So whether you're an FSP and you want to test your interoperability to a hub, you can use these simulators. Or if you're a hub implementer and you want to test against FSPs in a simulated fashion, you can do that as well. Or some kind of combination of that, whether you have real FSPs and a combination of simulated FSPs, you can do that. We have the testing toolkit, which you'll hear more about today as well shortly. And we also have a whole bunch of, let's say, license security and audit scanning capabilities that happen throughout let's say the life cycle of when we build or when we contribute code, etc., to the open source organization. On the top left, we also have the software development kits, which is pretty much includes things like the Mojaloop SDK, which the scheme adapter is actually built on. And we have things like the Oracle SDK, which is used to implement the registries that account lookup use, etc. And we also have the event SDK, which is used in conjunction with the event sidecars for logging errors and audits, etc., and handling the tracing capabilities of the system. On the left side, we have the operational monitoring, which is basically the technologies we use to see what's going on. We're using basically tracing, open tracing. Specifically, we're using APM for monitoring the tracing events throughout the system. We have EFC, which is used to capture a central location for our logs, as well as indexing them and making them searchable, which is pretty useful for seeing what's going on when there's issues. We also have Promfana, which is already mentioned earlier, which is basically where our real-time metrics, etc., are displayed, and where we can see very much the health of our system. And on the bottom, we have the container management and orchestration layer, which includes things like Helm, which has already been mentioned, which is used for deploying Mojaloop itself. We have Kubernetes itself, which we use as an abstraction layer from the underlying infrastructure, as well as abstracts us from things like AWS, Azure, or whether we want to run on-prem. It provides us that capability. And you already saw some of the benefits of Kubernetes by Lewis in his previous presentation, showing that by using Kubernetes, we can handle let's say the uninterrupted updating of components in a controlled manner. Not to say there isn't some work, and it's not to say it's super easy, but it certainly provides that capability. And of course, we have the continuous integration and delivery components on the far right, where we use Circle CI, Docker Hub, NPM, etc., for our artifacts. And we also have some infrastructure as code, which I believe you'll hear about more in the next couple of days throughout the MojoCon. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Sam.
Thanks, Miguel. That sounds good. I think we'll go into detail about some of these in the later section. So unless we have any questions, let's move on. Briefly, wanted to touch on some of the collaboration that's happening in the community. We have these streams like cross-network currency stream. We have more than 2 companies working on all of these. We have a code quality and security improvement stream comprising of several companies there. We have worsening standards that we just saw, ISO integration, and QA, which is happening as well. We recently, this also, I think, to some extent addresses what Pierre brought about earlier. We have a Postman collection with the JWS enabled now that provides more coverage and helps us streamline on the testing as well. That was donated by Mobile initially, and we're now working to streamline that. We have enabled JWS services on outbound messages. So now the deployments that we have public-private keys, and they sign the messages that are outgoing. So that feature has been enabled, and it was a collaborative effort. We have settlements we discussed yesterday, and we have a PISP stream that is happening with multiple companies as well. We'll listen to that update later today as well. So there are some teams that we'd like to talk about. We'll see the update from a change control board, the design authority, and there are some channels here I've listed where the community actively supports requests for requests for support, where we have questions about interpretation of specification, bugs reported, announcements happening, questions for the DA and developer community. So feel free to make use of these. About the DA, we have Nico here, currently the chair of the design authority team. Nico, can you take it from here, please?
Sure, thanks, Sam. Okay, so you've heard on some previous talks, the last two talks that we had, we spoke about versioning, zero downtime, deployment. So all of those issues were brought to the attention of the design authority, and we had plenty of discussions regarding that and reached some decisions. So that is actually part of the responsibility of the design authority. If you can go to the next screen, please, Sam. And this has been lifted from Simeon's page that he posted on the Mojaloop Foundation regarding design authority duties and responsibilities. But it's first of all to ensure a uniform architecture, and that goes hand in hand with verifying the architectural standards, as you see lower down there, and providing a channel for bringing ideas for design and verification to the attention of the core team developers. For that purpose, there is a board. Sam did highlight on the previous slide the Slack channel available for that. So we really welcome any ideas and input on that. And we do then take it and publish it on the board. You will see, or I think it was in the previous slide, but there's a short version or short code for the board itself. And we also provide a channel. Sorry, next one.
Yeah, so we have the link. I think it was referring to that.
So there's a link. Okay, so we, okay, if you go to the next screen, please. Thank you. So let's talk about, if you look at this overview of the board that we're currently showing here, and let me tell you just a quick rundown of the design committee, where it comes from. It's been in existence for about 2.5, 3 years, I would say. Currently, the membership is driven by participation and contribution to the OSS. And we have about 9 companies represented on that board. People like Coil, DPC Consulting, MyFOS, Google, Modusbox, Crosslake Technologies, Mojaloop Foundation, BOT, Bank of Tanzania, and TerraPay. And the DA meets once every week, and the process is as follows. So this board will contain all of the, as you see, the first swim lane identified. Any item or topic for discussion brought to our attention will be put on there. As soon as we find an owner for that, we assign it to the owner and we move it to the next one, and then it is scheduled for discussion. Just prior to the meeting that is once a week, we send out the agenda. So, and we wait until a day or two before, because it's happened in the past where we set up an agenda, a high priority item comes up for discussion and we have to change. So then we have the meeting, and if we don't finish a meeting, but they need a decision quickly on that specific topic, we do schedule an ad hoc meeting sometime later in the week that suits everybody. We send out minutes after the meeting and look at the board, move stuff around, prioritize issues, move it forward, and then schedule the next meeting. And that is the current cadence. Let me see. Okay, so those are some of the items on the board. In total, we've pushed 60 through for discussion already. Well, not all 60. 60 we've got on the board, 40 was pushed through, 20 we still have in the process of discussion. So it is a really live and active board. Thanks, Sam.
Cool. Thanks, Nico. for the overview. Going to the focus area. So just to, for those of you tracking time, we have, I think, 37 slides and 4 demo items. So I'm thinking we should be able to stay on time. So the focus areas for this PI for us have been adopting or implementing the version 1.1 changes from the interoperability API. So maintenance, doing the Helm releases, support for the accented characters and names, and of course, quality assurance. The bulk transfers, implementing the negative scenarios, the get bulk transfers implementation, and standardization. On the toolkit, we see that we are focusing on wider adoption and applicability for hub implementations, primarily for this PI. Performance or involvement has been predominantly on the POC side, which we have a dedicated session tomorrow. Apart from that, there are a couple of other items supporting the streaming improvements the COIL team has been doing, and also adding the caching changes, which were the outcome of the PI9 performance testing into the master branches.
Sam, before you go on, can you talk briefly, the accented characters makes it sound like it's accented characters on a Latin character set. Is there support for non-Latin characters at present? Have we done investigation into that? I believe we have on the line some folks from Myanmar.
Yeah. So we have discussed that, Miller. So now it allows the accented characters like the Latin characters that you said, Unicode that is supported by some of the OpenAPI backend libraries. Regarding the non-Latin characters and special characters, they're still not allowed, and we are investigating into libraries that will support those. And we probably will need to have another look at our regular expressions. Right now, we are using an expression which is different from what we have in the API spec. And once we conclude all the requirements, the one that you brought up, we want to propose that to the CCB so that it's adopted into the API as well.
I think that's great. And the point I was going to make here was to reach out to those who are in actual local practice with non-Latin character sets, which would include some areas of India. It could also include Myanmar, which is an active implementation that's underway now. And they'll have the need, for example, this is specifically for name formats. This is for people that are following this conversation, that the name formats that are accepted through the API and that are processed in the switch at present, up until this change, could not include accented characters, or not, at least not correctly. And the change here is to ensure that you can use diacritical marks on characters using the Latin character set when you specify the name for, say, a company name or a person name or participant ID, and those kinds of things that are in name format. Of course, as we move into then areas that use a non-Latin character set, we need to identify what would be an appropriate character set supported by Unicode that would reflect the current cultural use. How would people identify themselves in written names?
Hey Malay, it's Rajiv here.
Hey Rajiv.
Yes, so the regular expressions that were provided for this do cater actually within other languages. It caters for those Unicode categories of all letters within all languages. So it does cater for Cyrillic and Latin and Devanagari, which is the script that's for Hindi, right? But it's also supposed to cater for the Burmese script, which is basically Myanmar, right? They use
Yes.
the Burmese script. So what we did notice is that the regex library within Node itself has a problem with these Unicode categories. So there are libraries like xregexp which do cater for these. So we're busy doing some investigations and maybe a small POC to just ensure that these work correctly and do cater for those. But currently we do have for all Latin or Roman characters as well as Cyrillic. So like
that's excellent.
Russian, Bulgarian and stuff, yeah.
Oh no, this is great. So I think obviously what we would like is to encourage Node to use the correct version of Unicode. I suspect that's what the challenge is that they're simply using Unicode 3.1 instead of using Unicode 5x, which they should be using now. My understanding is that's the stable version now that's widely referenced. It's considerably later than Unicode 5 actually. But Unicode 5 was the point at which, for example, Burmese was introduced into the Unicode sets. But it sounds great. So you're using the actual, what we would call the name character groups or whatever they're called.
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
Unicode categories, basically. That's
the Unicode
that's
categories.
Yeah.
So would it be helpful to involve some of the folks from the Burmese, the Myanmar project for Burmese script? And is it possible that we could see the development of some test cases that could be then used both in our own validation, the platform supports it, but also as is our request that goes back to the API spec, if there needs to be one, you know.
Thanks, Miller. Yeah, we note that. And as you indicated earlier, we have some of our contacts like Steve from in that interested market. So we will bring them on for this. And as you from the beginning, I think this was a tooling issue, widely including JavaScript as a tool, but the intention of the API itself was to allow all these characters. So
that's great.
Yes, yeah, I think
thanks, and Rajiv, very much.
Thank you, Rajiv. All right. The four different, out of the 5 items here, we have separate sections for 4 of these. On the performance, we'll just cover these very briefly now. We want to cover the items we did outside of the POC here, and then leave the rest for the session tomorrow. Once that is done, then we'll go into the version 1.1 changes. Miguel, can you take us to this one?
Yeah, so this PI from the core OSS side of things has been a bit more lightweight than the previous PIs. We spent a lot of the time at the beginning in workshops with Confluent to discuss the best practices on using Kafka and basically gathering learnings on how we should be deploying it and using it, etc. And also validating some of the architecture that we currently have, as well as also influencing some of the concepts that we'll explore as part of the POC, which you'll hear about more tomorrow. In the perf environment, I think from hopefully from Lewis a bit later on, you'll probably hear a bit more about some of the tools that he's helped create with regard to automating the configuration, the startup and shutdown of the performance environments, and which can also be used for other environments as well. But predominantly, that's where most of the, let's say, the foundations, the Mojaloop Foundation's infrastructure bills going towards. So we basically have some of that to help manage that. We've also done some enhancements to the central services stream, which is our Kafka library, specifically around the instrumentation, monitoring the internal queues of the producers and consumers, etc. And we've also, the core OSS team also provided support and verification to some of the work done by Coil, which you'll also hear about more in the performance discussion tomorrow. And of course, lastly was also a discussion about the proof of concept, which is basically about utilizing domain-driven designs, event-driven CQRS and event sourcing architectures. You'll hear more about that tomorrow in terms of how that looks and what are our current findings and feelings about it. And from a roadmap perspective, while a lot of the stuff on the left, you'll see mirrored on the right, around basically, let's say, implementing some of those best practices around learnings from Kafka in the infrastructure as code stuff that hopefully will be coming fairly soon. As I said earlier, you'll hopefully hear a bit more about that in the next coming days. And we also want to roll out the automatic config and startup and shutdown of the performance environment as well. Since we've been busy doing performance tests, etc., it's been a bit tough to slot that in. So after the convening, I think things will be a little bit less hot, so we can basically roll those out so we can save lots of money. On the Mojaloop client side, there's some additional optimizations that we can make for the streaming library, and some of those are actually from the POC stream at the moment. We've done some, since we've been doing some greenfields development work on the POC, it's an opportunity to relook in terms of how we've done the producer and the consumers, and we believe we have some optimized implementations for both of them, as well as some additional configurations that would help in things like improving resilience, performance, as well as even simplifying some of the implementations that we would potentially like to look at introducing into the current code base. And of course, lastly was the instrumentations. The work has been done. There's a pull request open, but it's currently pending at the moment. So we just need to close that off. And we also probably need to create some dashboards around that instrumentation as well. So I think that's it. I would also like just to say thanks to Crosslake, Lewis and Pedro for their work in this, as well as Coil for Joran and Donovan for their great work as well. And you'll be hearing more from all these guys through the course of today and tomorrow, etc. Thanks.
Thank you, Miguel. Just we'll go into this in detail tomorrow, but just if someone is wondering, the CQRS means a separation of command and query. So yeah, we'll discuss that more on the POC.
Yeah, that will all be explained in tomorrow's presentation on the performance things. So don't freak out if you don't know what CQRS or event sourcing, etc. That will be discussed in more detail tomorrow.
Thank you, Miguel. Let's go into the version 1.1 changes. So there were 3 primary changes. There were several changes actually from the API itself, where the API definition and the Swagger were updated, but 3 changes needed adopted or refactoring on the switch implementation. So we have primarily 1 change which affects functionality and 2 others which were mostly fixing behavior. And 1 was again another implementer's request that we did. So the first one is about supporting a Payee FSP notification. So there was a change request to send the Payee notification. If you remember, the primary flow or the intention of the version 1.0 was to send the notification once a transfer is finalized only to the payer FSP. The Payee FSP was not receiving any notification. So we received several requests from the community members and others about a need for a notification to the Payee in some cases. For example, if the risk is heightened or things like that. So what we did was the change control board, one of the members proposed a solution where a notification can be done in a manner that doesn't affect the current functionality. So we have a non-breaking change where Payee FSPs can use like a flag where they can request notification once a transfer is finalized. So this is done using a patch notification. We'll see. So previously, if a Payee FSP needs to find the transfer status, it had to send a get call. Right now, it doesn't have to do that. It can just use a flag. There is a field called transfer state in a fulfill message, a put transfers ID message, and it can have 2 values in version 1.1. If it is used as a reserve, then it indicates that the Payee FSP wants to get a notification for that. The notification will be a patch call. If it doesn't want a notification, it can send just a committed in the transfer state, and that's the end of it. So this way, we understand that there might be several FSPs in a scheme, and not all of them may not upgrade at the same time. So a payer FSP essentially doesn't see any change to the behavior, the switch behavior. And the Payee FSPs, only the ones that are upgraded and that want to use the latest functionality will see the change. FSPs that do not upgrade will still see the same behavior as before. So this is the transfer step, the last step focusing. You can see the switch, and let me use some annotation here. So we have a post transfers notification from the switch to the Payee FSP here. We are not seeing the payer FSP, which already sent that request, the prepare request. And after the reservation of funds here, the Payee FSP, instead of sending a committed, it sends the transfer state as reserved. So this indicates to the switch that the Payee FSP is interested in receiving the notification. And then here we see a patch notification for that. So here are some details you can look at later on. What are the supporting updates? We have simulator updates on both sides, tests, and what are the services that are primarily touched to make this happen. Again, briefly looking, there is just this notification, 2.8. Everything else is same as before. There is a commit notification if a transfer is received. That's the only change. This is the transfers architecture in PI10. Then we'll have, let's discuss these 3 changes, and then Valentin on the call will show the demo using the testing toolkit. So Valentin, once we are done with the 3 changes, I'll pass this on to you so that you can show the demo. The second change here is clarifying the usage of aborted. So previously, because of how the API definition was worded, there were 2 ways to reject a transfer. Sending a transfer state, which we discussed in the first change as well. Transfer state is aborted, and then there is error endpoint. But then once the implementation was done, after consultations with the CCB, we found that only the error endpoint was supposed to be used for rejections. A fulfill call was never supposed to be used with an aborted transfer state. So that has now been cleared. Now FSPs only use the error endpoint. The reason for this is that in the option 1 here, if they use a transfer state as aborted, because the other fields are optional, there are no details about why a transfer has been aborted. If a customer care executive wants to find out why it has been rejected, there is no way to get any information on that. So whereas the error endpoint has the error code and error details, so they have fixed details on how that can be interpreted and translated for the end user. So this is one of the changes as well. I wouldn't focus on this too much, just apart from the fact that it used to be very complicated on the left side. Now it has a simple behavior, just 1 step. And then the third change was adding an optional extension list element to some of the participants' requests. So previously there was no extension list element, but then we have requests and change requests from some of the implementations indicating that additional data is required for some of these items to meet the requirements, such as adding merchant identifiers to the extension list to indicate accounts associated with a particular transfer. So now this has been added to party ID info object and several post calls. So before we go into the next section, I'll pass it on to Valentin, who will walk us through the demo of these. Valentin, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. Well, let me share my screen. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
So this is the testing toolkit that will be presented later on in details. I will use to show the 3 changes. The first one, which was the request for notification. This is the test case that we have prepared. In this case, let me just open the monitoring tab of the testing toolkit. What we have to do here, as Sam mentioned, is that for a participant, for the payee to request notification, he has to send a transfer state as reserved. So we will activate this rule, and now I'll execute the test case, and let's see what we have on the monitoring. Here we can see that we have received the patch request from the switch. Here is the source is the switch, the destination is our FSP. This is a patch request, and we have the notification that transfer was committed at that time in the switch. Also, we can check here the where was it? Okay, and yeah, some of the logs are not easy to find at the moment. For the next one, for the abort, let me open the edit part of the test case. What we're doing here is we're posting a transfer. Then on the next request into the script section, first what we will do is we will send first abort request to the fulfill endpoint, and then on the tests we will check that the transfer state hasn't changed yet, and then we're going to send another request to the correct endpoint, to the error endpoint, with information about the reason for the rejection, and again we will validate the transfer state to make sure it's changed now to aborted. So here we're going to send the whole test case. As you can see here, status is reserved. When we sent the rejection request to the wrong path, and then when we send to the error path, the status is changed back, to aborted.
Thanks, Valentin. Just want to see here, highlight that. Just wanted to highlight that when we send an aborted in the fulfill transfer state, it's essentially being ignored. We just log and do nothing. Only when we send the error callback, it's being aborted. I had that discussion with some of the implementation teams recently. Good to establish that behavior here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's visible only in the switch logs. And for the last change, it's a single request basically. What haven't been done here before is that this part was missing, the extension list. Yep. Now the extension list is accepted as valid.
Yeah, can
valid field of the
yes.
To the test sections.
Yeah, so there we can see it's accepted. Good.
Yeah. This is it shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen back. Any questions so far? So I'll go through these a little bit quickly. Apart from the version 1.1, we had some other maintenance updates. We did a couple of Helm releases, 10.10, we'll go into that. Support for accented characters has been done. We'll see the demo on that as well. JWS signing has been enabled, and of course, we'll go to the QA and bug fixes section there. So on the Helm, we have 10 as you can go through this presentation, it's uploaded on GitHub. I've linked these to the release notes. We have actually one of a blog on the Mojaloop Foundation if you're interested to see what it contains and things like that. And we have Helm v3 and v2 supported as well. Backwards compatibility of the Helm charts. And Miguel did some work on improving the documentation there recently. Won't go into too much detail on this, but this slide shows the Helm release mechanism, where at the end you can see that it's released to the community, and there's a lot of stuff that happens here. I'll focus on one thing here though. We have a release candidate here. Michael, you asked something like this before. So we have a release candidate which we establish, set up, deploy, and iterate through to get to a good working version. And this is an iterative process. There are issues, bugs identified, and then release. So there's no reason why we can't have our partner implementations or our pioneers check them out and then take their feedback and make the release so that they don't have any issues after the actual release is made. So we will follow that mechanism moving forward. Yeah, it starts with feature. I don't want to go into too much detail for lack of time here, but if you have any questions, please reach out. Accented characters, we are a little short on time. I'll directly head into the demo here just to show that using the toolkit. I'll share my entire desktop and go to the toolkit, which was actually deployed using the Helm chart. So Rajiv, do you want to walk through this?
Yeah, sure. So basically what Sam is going to load some samples here that for the post quotes transfers, or just basically posting a payment. And we're adding in accented characters for the first name and last name of the participant. So if we go into edit there, Sam, yeah, sure. We'll see there that the personal info complex name, their first name and last name now has the accented characters on them. And when Sam sends through the request, it should go through from the get parties through the post without having any issues. And we'll see that the post itself, for the post quotes, has the actual, oh no, that create file backup. Could you go to the request, Sam?
Yes. Okay. On the quotes. Yeah.
Yeah, on the quotes. Yeah, we'll see here that this here actually passes through perfectly fine with no issues. The issue we had previously was that the characters, the payload was, the field was accepting any characters. This included special characters such as the @ or ampersand. So this regular expression that was given to us now caters for that there to be only specifically for language characters. So in this test, we put through a hash at the end of the name, and this should fail successfully because it's a negative test. So Sam, if you could send that through. Yeah, and if we go to the test.
As you can see, that, yeah, the status is a 400, which indicates that this is wrong and will not be allowed. So one of the, as I was answering Miller earlier, this was more of a tooling issue earlier because it was the regular expression was not being evaluated properly by the Enjoy and some of the Happy libraries. So now Rajiv did a lot of good work in customizing and using OpenAPI backend libraries, which now caters for this. So let me go back to the presentation quickly. And can you see it, Rajiv?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So there are some more details, but let's keep this brief. I'll skip into the QA section. We have fixed a total of 20 bugs, and there are some representative bugs here that I've listed. Nothing to go into the detail, but to show that most of these were not regressions as such, but kind of functionality that wasn't catered for from the beginning. For example, there is a 405 status code that the specification says should be returned for unsupported HTTP methods. It wasn't available earlier. Now we have all the services supporting that. So yeah. And then we have several QA updates. There are a lot of Postman collections right now available. I guess the more number of tests, the merrier. And we have a Mojaloop simulator collections that are used for validation. And I'll go through the Helm release there, notes where we reference this. We have JWS signing enabled for switch services. We have legacy simulator collection as well. We want to support them as the community moves away into the Mojaloop simulator collections. Then we have collections for bulk transfers. And the testing toolkit, as you can see, we are using for demonstration and validation as well. And we can show the honors 1.1 and bulk transfers using this. The roadmap will go into these into detail and break them down. But if this is prioritized as a high-level item on day 5, we want to start by updating the test collections to correlate with the sequence diagrams functionality, so that even at a business or a product level, we know when something goes wrong, we can correlate that with a sequence diagram step and know that, okay, this is where things are breaking. And then there are others. Amar, are you ready to go through some of these other roadmap items?
Yes, Sam, I'll go through. Yeah. So we would like to increase the number of test on features and API services, almost like double the number of assertions. Also, there are various other Postman collections used, which can be streamlined for general usage and also improve the reliability of the test. There are some more points such as like to use testing toolkit to provide at least current test coverage, to port the delta from legacy simulator collections to Mojosim collection. We would like to go forward with that too. Current cron job or daily run got only legacy collection. We would like to set up to run multiple collections such as like legacy collection, Mojosim collection, and also like bulk collections. Yeah, thanks, sir.
Thank you, Amar. In the interest of time, I'll wrap up this presentation there. We do have a lot of interesting stuff. I'm hoping you can be part of these breakout sessions so that we can take your feedback and input and the chart roadmap for P11 based on that. If you have any questions, we can follow up on Discourse or on chat. Thanks, Simeon. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Sam, for wrapping up. We have caught up a bit with time, but in order so that we don't lose time, I will pass this on to the next session. That's Kent Brown and Bryan Schneider, who will give us a couple of the Modusbox community contributions. Sam, Kent, Bryan, you guys ready? I see Kent sharing the screen, but Kent, you're
Here we go. Sorry, I was mute. Okay. So yes, hi, Kent Brown from Modusbox, and just want to talk about some of the recent progress and contributions. You know, I would say we're on iterative improvement on the experience. A lot of the things we've heard at past convenings about onboarding and those sort of things. You know, we've been lucky to have the opportunity to work with several, actually going to production, working with customers, learning, and so we're just constantly trying to reapply that to improve the experience both in the core as well as in some of the supporting pieces that are needed in production. So a real quick recap on multi-currency and settlement. Those are a couple of items we've talked about several times. So the foreign exchange provider that was needed, especially at Mawali, and won't go into detail because we've covered that, but just mainly to say that it's live now, which is exciting. And then there's a new version that's being tested so what's live, I think Rob told me to say we had MAD skills, because MAD is it's euro to MAD is the Moroccan currency that we're doing. So that's a bad accountant joke. So that's live. And then now the request was to go really multi-currency and bidirectional flows. And so that has been built and is being tested. So great progress there. The Treasury management function, that's about moving real money behind the scenes to settle and pay, and sort of to manage liquidity, to manage that foreign exchange when you have an external provider doing the actual exchange rates. And so, yeah, a lot of progress going on there. And I'm going to keep going, just update. Those two are being used and continuing to evolve. So I'm going to come back in a second, but for now I'm going to turn it over to Bryan to talk about the onboarding journey. As we mentioned, that's a huge focus right now that we've really trying to help make progress on. So Bryan? Sure.
So we've been focused and deeply concerned with the actual cost, time, complexity, and frustration for DFSPs thinking about joining Mojaloop schemes. The creation of the SDK, which we're creating a formalized connector out of, that was to make that whole process simpler, both for the hub operator, so that there's some sort of consistency with how people manage security and connect back into their organization, to reduce the number of calls and the time and frustration for their customers, but also to simplify the number of tasks and jobs DFSPs have to understand how to do. And ultimately, when you think about onboarding all the scheme participants, that's a barrier to entry, and that gets into the raw cost of deploying the scheme. So, we last convening, I think, and the one before, we started talking about, hosted learning and hosted labs and that sort of thing. And that's the first part. That's how you get exposure and you start to learn what are your individual jobs if you're a member of a DFSP staff, or if you're a local SI partner, what do you need to do to get that organization connected? And then what do they need to do to run on an ongoing basis, within the scheme? So you can go to the next slide. So the Mojaloop DFSP experience is kind of our branding around pulling together the initial learning steps online in a hosted way where you can just try things out. And then the tools that you can download locally that prove that you have solid connectivity and allow you to start to build out those local integration components that you're going to need with your backend. And that's either you or your SI partner doing that for you. And then the process for validating, doing the internal business validation, as well as validation against Mojaloop standards and preparing you to connect into that scheme sandbox. So ideally, that whole time from I've decided or I've been made aware that I need to join a scheme until I'm competently in that scheme sandbox. Driving that down as much as possible. And we think that's valuable both for the individual organizations and for the scheme operators, because, again, customer frustration and volume of calls all just, leads to experience and cost. We can go to the next slide. So, the components of the experience I was going through, initially there's learning, and then there's the building,
Did I skip a slide there? No, okay.
No.
Sorry, good.
Then there's the building, validating, and running, and that kind of leads into operational support. We have something that we're introducing called Payment Manager for Mojaloop, PM4ML, and that's the visualization part. So if you think of the Mojaloop connector or the SDK as the connectivity components, the secure connectivity, then how do I see where are my operational and technical dashboards for observing the flow and ultimately supporting things like reconciliation. And for organizations without sophisticated backends, then it gives them something. And while you're building out even the internal integration, it allows you to see what did happen and what went wrong, why it went wrong, and kind of expedite that. And it really pulls together some very good things that are already out in the community. So it's pulling together the testing toolkit, the simulator, the connection manager and connection manager client for security management workflow, as well as adding, these dashboards. And very much like the SDK or the Mojaloop connector has been expanded to allow it to plug into existing connectivity experiences. A good example of that is the MIFOS integration hub, and it's able to use the expanded connector in the way it wanted to. The API has been shifted there. You can also view this as a Mojaloop aware reporting console, if you will, that gives you visibility, and while it does come with a complete integration experience, it doesn't require that experience. So you could think of it as another tool that could be laid into something like that to just up the overall experience. Right. Next slide. So it's kind of step one of this, the onboarding journey of the FSP experience. This is about people getting aware of what Mojaloop is and what their job functions might be and how they might do them. So while we focus on technical people quite a lot, how do I build and do the technical bits? There's also operations staff at these organizations, and they need to know how to view and support Mojaloop payments. How do you open a ticket? And if a customer calls and they're concerned about something that happened, how do you actually validate what happened? How do you see what happened locally versus remotely? And that really gets to the root of expediting concerns. Otherwise, everything dead ends into a call to the hub, and that's really not sustainable for hub operations once they grow to a very large size. Right? So the initial part is familiarity, and then we have hosted learning, and then this is setting you up where you can download those components and prove connectivity back, and that sets us up for next slide. Building out the local integration components. So most organizations will need to build some sort of a connector between whatever technology they're using to manage their day-to-day operations today and the Mojaloop connector that is connecting them out to a scheme. And so this step is all about building that out and then giving their internal business the tools they need to validate that everything is still correct as things are routing, that their internal accounting is proper, and that give them a very solid feeling that once they connect to a sandbox, they would do a good job in that environment, right? And we can hop to the next slide. And then the last step here is actually connecting into a sandbox. So this is going to be scheme specific, and how this part works will vary with the specific scheme, but minimally through your connectivity dropdown, you would just choose that environment, and as much as possible of the configuration steps would be done for you already, and then you'd have to complete that. But you could feel pretty good that the data transfers that you're doing would align with what that scheme was expecting. And when it doesn't, again, you have the same tools to see why it's not working and tweak whatever you need to. And now we're on into day-to-day running, you know, of the business. And that might be it. What's the next slide? Yep. So it's going to do a bit deeper dive on the payment manager for Mojaloop specifically.
Yeah, and as he said, sort of the learn, test, validate, and run. This really focus on the run. Like, what's it like in a DFSP to be connected to the hub and to daily validate that everything's going right? So there is a piece, what we call a real-time ledger, that could be useful in some situations. It's not used in every case, but it's where if your core isn't able to respond in time, that we can sort of keep another system of record to respond yes and to get eventual consistency with the core. We have a business operations portal and a technical operations portal, again, to be able to, and I'll just show that in a second here. Really quick, just kind of highlight what Bryan said. The heart really is this Mojaloop connector, and what that is just a slightly expanded beyond just the SDK, which is out there and being used. It's tying together better on the client side some of the connection manager pieces that were done for the hub to set up and coordinate the establishing of all those, you know, key pairs and the signing and storing of those. To allow, this basically allows the DFSP to also have this similar experience to participate in that, but also to store, to keep all the, you know, the JWT tokens from the other participants that they're connecting with. So it's just all wrapped up in a bundle so that it basically is going to talk the ILP, but also it's going to do all the security for you. So that's what the Mojaloop connector is. And we, like Bryan said, even if the screens don't make sense, we think this is going to just make sense for everybody to get that secure connection. Sort of just expanding out a little bit. So we've got the Mojaloop connector bringing in secure messages. The portals, I'll show that in a second. That's obviously the piece. And so there's some experience APIs to, as things are flowing through the system, to be able to just visualize both technical and business operations. And if there are tweaks or validation and testing, like the test components that we talked about could be there. So we're actually building out, and I think there's another presentation on sort of a framework, a portal framework technology to allow people to pull together different screens to have a single screen that makes sense for them to manage their business. So then the big third piece is the core connector, which people would do in many ways. As Bryan said, it may be a local SI, maybe the DFSP staff internally. We've built several recently and kind of followed a pattern of using Camel, which is just open source and pretty solid integration technology. And we've also used Data Sonnet, which we've mentioned in the past, open source data transformation. And so we actually have a template that we'll be sharing that people can use as a way to build that core connector kind of efficiently and in a way that very easily ties in with the rest of the system. So yeah, that's the core idea of a payment manager. What I'm going to do, this is a piece of that, you know, that connection wizard screen. But what I'm going to do, I've got some slides in the deck I'll leave there, but I'm going to switch over and just kind of demo. So I've got a couple of Docker images here. We've got, this is just a kind of a sneak peek early view of a couple of the core screens in the UI. The data is auto-generated for test purposes, so it doesn't in every case make perfect story, but I'll just give a quick walkthrough. So this business, the first page is the business ops dashboard, where you can see, okay, relative to my total liquidity available, here are where my running positions are in terms of reserve funds and transfers committed, and see, am I going to be in trouble? Do I need to manage the liquidity? You can also see your outflow versus inflow and kind of see, okay, I'm net sender or net receiver. Any errors that happen, you'll be able to break down and see the percentages. And then this is a settlement. Let's see if I search here. This kind of goes by date. These are I guess you call settlement windows, or we're actually calling them reconciliation time blocks. So whatever period you choose to, the DFSP wants to reconcile, they'll be able to keep track of, they've sort of pulled it together, it's open, they're in process, or they've rejected, they found errors they're working through, or it's on track or it's complete. So that's just a high level view on a daily basis, or maybe more than daily to go through the reconciliation. And then more details on the transfers. You can just look at a glance and say, oh, we had a time when we had several failures. Was there something technical going on, or is there some kind of pattern in our usage? Average time, just we've seen that healthy systems are it's sub 5 seconds for the whole transfer, and so just being able to watch that and see, okay, it's trending down, that's great, or it's trending up. Do I need to look at something technically? And then some of the errors, just you could view all errors, be able to sort by different things. Or another scenario, there's some particular transfer someone wants to know about, so being able to go and find a transfer, say, okay, I'm going to filter it by date, and let's see, I go and find it. So I've got too many to look at, and so then I can filter it by institution. So I'll go 38Y. So I've quickly zeroed in on the transaction that can then drill into the details. So yeah, this is just an early start. We've done this kind of thing in other industries, and so we're still learning. So if anybody has any DFSPs that are starting to onboard, we really want to engage and add and tweak and make this exactly right for the DFSPs.
Something to add on the kind of the technical dashboards, if you will. What this will show at a high level is, what are the response times? Like, how is the scheme responding to me, and how am I responding to the scheme? So if we have failures, well, first you want to know, is it my fault or not? The scheme, same thing. The scheme wants to know, are failures due to it having a technical problem, or its customers having a technical problem, so it can manage appropriately. So manage high-level dashboards to let you know if there is a problem, and is it your problem directly, or one that you have to manage your customers' expectations because of the scheme, and then drill down dashboards that help you get to the root cause of the issue, right? So you can.
Yeah, the plan is to hook into those same event IDs, I guess, that are being used internally for tracing in the hub, and that we'll plug into those as well and be able to tie together end to end. What did the hub do? When did they send it? What did I do with it? How does that all tie together? Okay, so again, these slides are there. That's it for me. Anything else to add, Bryan? Or we can hand it up.
Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kent and Bryan. I will move over to the next session, which is the code quality workstream. Godfrey, Lewis, and Victor, and Max. Are you guys ready?
Ready? Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Thanks a lot, Simeon, for this opportunity. And good morning, good day, and good afternoon. So today we'll just go through what we've achieved in the last PI, and really projecting through some of the targets that we had from the beginning, so that we can get the community to understand the progress that we're making and get lots of contribution from anyone. And we actually welcome most of the input that we have received, and especially from the likes of Mwali, around all the challenges that they're facing. So this is the team that really has a special focus, to really help out, whether internal to OSS, and extended that support to implementation to make sure that they can deal with whatever challenges around quality and security. In today's presentation, I've got 3 more speakers to come in and contribute, although it's very small sections for each, and we'll try and contain it within the allocated time. Okay, just to kickstart, I just want to quickly give kind of like a high-level overview, especially to those new attendees, or any of the members of the community who have not been very close to what we do. Essentially, we're responsible to really, help and encourage and build a very good trust, into the Mojaloop platform to ensure that, it is highly reliable, secure, as well as, of high quality. And as per some of the principles that have already been shared, from Mila as well as from Matt, the quality and the privacy of the system is quite very important so that it can actually have the grounds and gain adoption. And essentially as a work stream, we actually meant to really, continuously improve on that. And moving on to how we do this, it is really, a combination of working together with the team that is working the core side, the functionality side, and ensuring that there's kind of like a one-to-one sync in what everybody else is doing in a very, very good, well-crafted shared responsibility model. Because as you know, most security models are affected around kind of like a military style, authoritative, policy-based way of ruling. But that cannot actually be sustained in an open source community such as this one. So we encourage lots of cooperation, we encourage lots of working together across all the various streams that we have on the project. And again, in terms of our approach, we actually pretty much started focusing more on the controls, ensuring that all the standard controls that we know of in the software arena there, and maintaining all the quality standards that will help boost the quality of our project, to be of high quality. And then we move on to focus a little bit more on the risk and the threat side of what we're doing, wherein we're able to, comprehensively perform, risk assessment and ongoing vulnerability assessment, just to gain some degree of proactivity in terms of the, the incidents that we pick up. But then we're going to move that to the next stage, wherein we will do more threat modeling to be able to, really identify more things that are yet to come. That will actually help us to move from proactive security to predictive security, and anticipate, a lot of, problematic areas, and working towards, defining a very good set of security requirements, which can really, ensure that Mojaloop is safe and trusted, by all those who adopt it, and especially on the regulator side, and as well as on the authorities. Those questions will pretty much come along the line as the adoption rates grows and grow. And again, in terms of the milestone, we started pretty much early on, and as the foundation phase when the project was conceived, and part of the design team was really to build confidentiality and integrity in the core part of the architecture, and that has been done very well by various contributors, wherein each flow, each functionality, down to the epicenter has consideration, very strong consideration of security measures that needs to be in there. And also, we established a framework for software quality and security, which consisted of automated tools to ensure that we can do the checks at the necessary workflows of the CI/CD. And but we aim to do that, and we're trying all hard to really keep that as silent as possible to our community contributors, so that it doesn't kind of like discourage voluntary contribution, or it doesn't just becomes very, very too difficult to pave with. So we work very well with Luis around that to ensure that, and that was actually the bigger part of the focus until PI 8. From PI 9, we really started focusing on the risk side, and as well as moving on to look at baselining against standard, and focusing predominantly on the data, because much of the architecture side and the software framework side was on the infrastructure connectivity as well as the software layer. But now we actually can kind of like focus much more deep, on the inside, outside, and looking at the data and all the various areas of the platform where this data is being traversed, stored, or shared, to ensure that the levels of security, even tied directly to confidentiality of privacy data, is really, really, really guaranteed. So moving into this PI, we pretty much picked, a topic that is, interrelated around improvements of data protection measures across, the entire platform, and focusing really on what we call as critical and sensitive data, so that we don't have a large pool of information that we have to go through. And that actually was very, very specific to some of the guidelines that we identified on GDPR, as well as PCI DSS. So we looked at specifically personal identifiable information and also payment sensitive data, for which for now, we can't categorically say we have anything, that can be, related to card industry, but we really wanted to use the payment card industry standard as a baseline for us to see how we're doing. So just to keep it very simple and less complicated to tackle, we break it down into 4 areas, from standard baselining, data privacy and security, DevOps security, which is a multi-PI operational support that we are continuing on the work that we started from day one, and as well as the crypto function. Formally we call this HSM, but as the discussions goes, we just standardize by saying it is a cryptographic processing function that is needed within Mojaloop. So in essence, I'll cover the first part, which is the standard baseline, and I'll bring 3 of my colleagues on the call just to cover the other 3 areas, just to ensure that we were comprehensively giving feedback on a lot of work that we put in. Just around the standard baseline, we actually had a lot of discussions around, which standard we need to look at and why, and how best we can benefit from each standard. And we finally, just had some agreements on PCI DSS, primarily because we are in the payment industry and is one of the, the most, followed and the most formalized standard in the payment industry. Although it focuses, predominantly on card, related data and payments, but it actually presents us with a very good set of security practices that we can expand even beyond the cardholder data. So if you look at how the standard itself has been broken down, we just carefully, looked at the protect card data section, and we just did a quick kind of like a fictitious assessment on it without having to worry about where's the card data within our environment, and really spend a lot of time to focus on the other, requirements, which we actually, it's been, kind of like categorized as, those are the environmental aspects of where your system that will be processing the card will be staying. So by following that, there's a lot of, very good, practices and benefits that we can derive from referencing the standard. As I've indicated, we will not be doing kind of like a watered down, following, audit by audit what we found, but rather we actually just be inferring from it to say, what does the standard says around all these areas that we're tackling and how best we can do, just basic baseline, and we'll be able to know where we actually doing against others. Just a quick on the approach that we use for this. We really took it, section by section, requirement by requirement, point by point, to really go through, what, the requirements want for each. And we built what you call a control ownership, which really helped us to, to dissect between, the hub operator, as well as the infrastructure operator and Mojaloop, to say, where does this really, belongs? So that actually helped us to categorize and be able to, apportion responsibility according to, where it fit the most. And as the Mojaloop, team will focus on those aspects of software that we can actually have an impact in assisting, the hub operators to be compliant, or to be as close as they can get with the standard. Necessarily compliance is not the target in this area. And we just want to make sure that, what is known out there, what is in the accepted best practice, is also something that we touch very well. So in terms of the assessment approach, we went through all the 12 sections, and over 252 requirements, and we recorded the findings and we made the recommendation in terms of how to handle each. And the report is available for us to go through it and be able to analyze it further for our own internal use. Just to quickly give a high-level view of how we approach it. So as you can see, the blocks here around, what belongs to who, I've actually categorized it just to between hub operator and Mojaloop OSS. And I can pretty much say, all the sections of the standard, we actually cover. We're able to say we can do something about it to ensure that it is part of what we've built into our Mojaloop system. And there is no gap whatsoever that we say we can categorically say it's not applicable, especially on the cardholder environment part of it. And on the cardholder data itself, we actually really still went on to perform it as if we're hosting cardholder data somewhere within our ecosystem so that it can give us a feel of how we're doing against that. And overall, I would say we really managed to give very, very practical recommendation. And we'll be able to say, even if the customers are using this either on a traditional platform or on a cloud native platform, much of what is in the standard will still be applicable. Because if you can look at PCI DSS itself, it has been founded lately when some of these newer technologies are available. And as compared to other standards, is one standard that the security profession can take it and do a full assessment of any cloud environment. And the likes of Microsoft Azure, AWS, they already have this and they've already done the assessment on themselves. And most of their components are already PCI certified. And in terms of the next steps around this is really to take a deep dive into what have we seen and consciously maybe make a choice to say, do we want to pick up more things to be addressed at Mojaloop level? Or are we happy with most of the things that are really sitting inside the hub operators bucket? And it is so primarily because there's a lot of operation aspects of this, which, as you know, we don't operate. We build software, and for somebody else to take and operationalize it. And also, where we deem it fit for us to tackle, we'll still have to take it through some form of risk assessment validation to make sure that it is kind of like extremely important in terms of the risk level for us to deal with it, and also to ensure that whatever we bring in as a result of what we pick to do doesn't break our architecture, but rather we align it accordingly to make sure that it goes in sync with what we've been doing. And that is in a nutshell the overview of the funding. In terms of what we believe is the outcome of such an assessment is really a number of kind of like benefits for us we can derive from it. Firstly is just having a very comprehensive report against standard, which we can share with anybody who wants to ask questions around how are we doing against best practice standard, or generally what does the Mojaloop security look like. And using a standard, it really takes your opinion aside, and it uses the kind of like the collaborative efforts of the masses, what people believe, because writing the standard, we pull from all different sides of players in the market, and what goes into the standard is something that is kind of like uniformly accepted by all. And also the responsibility metrics is one of the byproducts of this, for everybody to see which responsibility can go where. And going into what we have done under the CPM, we actually factored in, some of the requirements that come from the PSS DSS into our cryptographic processing unit. And some of the benefits that actually really goes into the hub operators is, they'll have a very simple, way of communicating information with the, external regulators, authorities, on something that is really common to all of them that they can accept. And over and above that is a common library that they can reutilize for their own internal exercises. And overall, the PCI DSS standard itself is really well represented in some of the existing standards like the NIST as well as an ISO. So having tackled it, in this fashion, we can quickly cross-grade it to any other standard, or should any of our, implementation teams have kind of like questions around how well are they doing against those standards, they can use this to really pivot and fast-track their assessment of those other standards. Just to quickly, in wrapping, before I, send it to, Victor to come in, we actually did an exercise to say, in all the areas that we touched under code quality, what is the impact on the overall Mojaloop API? So, if you can see the below table is really the area we tag, the description of it, and the applicability of a major area within the API, and also the subcomponents that are involved in there, just to give visibility in terms of how slowly are we bringing the improvements into the API, and which components of our API are being affected by these improvements. And obviously the source of what we do, we need to disclose it. And in this case, the source of this is really best practice to really make sure that we're aligned with what the payment industry is doing. With those, I'll quickly hand over to Victor to take it from here and go through the data protection section. Victor, over to you.
Thank you, Godfrey.
I'll drive it from my end.
It's okay. Thanks for that detailed overview. I think it's increasingly clear that data privacy and protection is a hot topic for cybersecurity professionals, technical people, and business and business leaders. So it is important for us not to lose focus on this growing cybersecurity risk. As an extension of what Godfrey has talked about, highlighting the need to revisit our implementations from a baselining perspective, I would like to quickly take you through some of the areas we looked at with a specific focus on PCI data, protection standards, as well as the bigger headache that is coming up called GDPR, that is fast becoming an issue, and it even affects one of our current implementations. Next. So this work stream fed off the earlier highlighted data privacy and security work stream, as Godfrey mentioned in the PI10 objective. We were seeking to identify areas within a typical Mojaloop implementation and processing scenario where we have PII data, and then what happens to that data and what can we do around that data. So essentially we were asking ourselves two questions. Do we have PII data during a typical Mojaloop transaction? This includes the applications, and also it includes the logs that are being generated by the systems. The second thing we wanted to look at, informed by the baselines, is how can we protect this information by securing the data within the Mojaloop ecosystem, and also monitoring the environment to ensure that we have capability to detect data breaches and data privacy issues with regards to data protection. So in order for us to do that, we needed to have a clear definition. Next, Godfrey. We need to have a clear definition of data in terms of what is PII data. Just go back a bit. Yes, we needed to have a clear definition of data, and I'll quickly highlight that we identified, for example, from GDPR, that PII data is classified into three broad areas. We have what is known as linked data. From a Mojaloop perspective, linked data would be the MS-ISDN, the customer, the sender party names, and any other details that are used in a transaction, such as first name, last name, nationality, sex, gender, and the likes. Now, there is linkable data which can be used in addition to, or in combination, to identify more information about an individual. And this could be financial data, such as transactional information, as well as medical and employment information, which might not apply in this case. And then finally, we have the technical metadata that can come into play. For example, IP addresses, device IDs, which will also be very important when we look at it from a Mojaloop perspective. As Godfrey has spoken about from PCI DSS perspective, card holder data essentially is all the details around the card, being the names and authentication information that is tied to the card. As such, we note that GDPR on a broad sense also covers to an extent some aspects that need to be protected from a PCI DSS perspective. Next. So some of our key findings in this case, we identified that yes, we do have PII data A within the application processing, as well as the logs being stored within the system. We also went further in our log analysis to identify that we have some instances of credentials being stored within the application logs. And this is something that needs to be taken up with the development team. We looked at data processing and data in motion, where we focused on the Kafka topics, producers and clients, and the streams. And we identified that we currently run with the plain text information exchange. However, now the recommendations here would be to implement security for downstream implementations. We also noted that a typical Kafka implementation will not have audit logs enabled by default. What do I mean by this? Most of these open source solutions come with minimalist implementation out of the box. Any extra information that you need out of some of these solutions require your own personal initiative to activate the components or augment them with additional libraries and tools. Now, with regards to Kafka, we observed we had an abundance of technical event logs which detail standard changes to resources. However, audit or security-related information was not available, and to do this, we require third-party utilities and or custom code to be able to do that. This also applied to the Kubernetes clusters as we were looking at data in motion. The Kubernetes environment which runs the images does not have audit logging enabled by default, meaning we were able to see standard application event logs. But if we wanted to identify, say, for example, who loaded a pod, who is querying running pods, who ran an execution within a pod, all that information is not available because it currently needs to be enabled by the downstream implementers. Finally, one of our last key finding was that our Mojaloop databases store the data in an unencrypted format. However, because we are using Azure storage is encrypted, so the DB itself is encrypted. This leaves a lot of room in terms of data protection initiatives based on this, and we can look at that in the subsequent slides. Next, Godfrey. I'll try to move a bit faster in the interest of time. From a logging perspective, we were able to look at various areas around protection of security logs. As I've said earlier, we have event logs and we also have security audit logs. So when it comes to protecting audit logs, these were some of the broad areas that we were looking at with regards to how we need to protect our audit logs in terms of who has access to the logs, what are they able to do with our security logs, are we able to set in place authentication and authorization for our IT administrators with regards to security logs around a Mojaloop implementation? Are we able to tell from API calls relating to logging and log generation, who did what, from where, and how it happened? So if we move next to some of our findings, we'll see that some of the recommendations that we made include, A, we need to include audit and we need to remove sensitive information from the logs. We identified, for example, the central event processor logs contain the root password for the MySQL database. Central ledger, finance portal services, they had within their logs some SQL statements that created the user's central ledger, and that user had the password again exposed within the logs, among other artifacts which are security related. So these need to be removed from the logs. To do this, we need to develop standard processes for log management and log generation. What I mean here is we need to define a framework that will guide how we will generate logs within Mojaloop, how we will store and manage these logs within a Mojaloop environment. And then we also need to define a standard security logging format for application security logs over and above the standard event logs, which are currently being captured within the framework. And then we also need to create and maintain the infrastructure for logging, bearing in mind that security logs will have a performance impact, and thus they need to be enabled with care in mind. And then, of course, we need to have access to log protocols where we govern who has access to the logs and what they can do with it. Next, as we wind up. From a Kafka and Zookeeper perspective, we made the following recommendations. We need to enable encryption within the data streams. Here we're talking about the producers and consumers. We also need to enable authentication via either SSL or SASL for who can write and or read within the Kafka streams. Over and above this, we need to set up ACLs surrounding each of these users allowed within the Kafka environment as to what they can do and what they cannot do. And then from a performance perspective, we need to look at enabling quarters and throttling. This is to just fine tune the performance within a very busy environment. And then finally, Zookeeper being the config manager needs to be isolated within the management network, and most standard network implementations should have segregation for the management platforms for all their services. Next, please. We have here a typical standard secure Kafka Zookeeper architecture. I will just leave this for your own understanding, but essentially we're talking about having TLS and or SSL implementation between the Kafka clusters within the Zookeeper cluster and between the Kafka clients, how they communicate to the Kafka cluster. We can go into details of this within the breakout session. I will skip over to the API touchpoints. As Godfrey highlighted earlier, we were largely informed by best practice standards governed by GDPR and PCI DSS. All of these looking at PII data, what data we are logging, how we are protecting transaction data, and how the third-party tools such as Kafka, Pathfinder, MongoDB are being used within our environment to create, process, and store data. So in light of this, what are some of the next steps that we are looking at from a data protection perspective? We are looking at stories around Kafka and Zookeeper enhanced security architecture. However, in light of this having a performance implication, there will need to be a lot of testing to see what impacts enabling encryption within Kafka will have, having an appropriate design around this, and having all the stakeholders give their input into this. Then in line with the HSM story that we will be highlighted in subsequent slides, we need to investigate how the HSM can help have a good PKI infrastructure to enable security around Zookeeper and Kafka. We need to investigate enabling auditing within Kubernetes environment. It is important to understand that from Kubernetes version 1.11, they introduced the audit logging module. And that audit logging module has its own specific configurations to allow you to enable the logs, configure who logs, what is being logged, and how you can capture the logs, where to send the logs, be it to a log file or to a web application, or have a dynamic setup. And then number 6 is to investigate the disabling of sensitive information around application logs. And then finally have a standard Mojaloop security logging framework that will govern all subsequent additions to the Mojaloop development to have a standardized framework of output. With that, I hand over back to Godfrey. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Godfrey. I might pick it up from here. No, I don't have much. Basically, my work in the code quality work stream has mainly just been around tooling and looking at existing node module scanning and GitHub security alerts, and just kind of gradually improving some of the tooling around that. So in this PR, we implemented a monthly review of all of the security alerts, where we've been going through and following up any of the dependency issues that GitHub flags, and then opening follow-up tickets if necessary, to make sure those things are being properly handled. This also kind of leads into some of the stuff that we presented earlier with the versioning workstream around applying security patches. So right now we're doing these security patches, but there's no way for them to end up in actually running Kubernetes clusters. So that is kind of the other piece that we're working on here. We're also working a little bit around tooling to make sure to reduce the amount of spam everyone's been getting from Dependabot. GitHub's been expanding their tooling around that. So that's kind of opening up a few new options around notifications and the like. I think that's all I really had, Godfrey. So feel free. I think I'm handing over to Max next. Well, I'll let you take it from here. Yeah, Max, thank you.
Yeah, that's if I can ever find my unmute button. It's a technical thing.
You are muted.
I'm muted again. There. Okay.
Hey, Max, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay. I'll now try and leave everything alone and let Godfrey drive. This is obviously a technical issue. I don't know how you can trust me with technical things like security. But anyway, okay, the overview is, I'll try and go through this quite quickly so we can sort of not run over time. I do sometimes tend to waffle on things I get really enthusiastic about. We want to try and bring full transaction data security into the Mojaloop ecosystem in line with PCI DSS, PCI HSM standards, although strictly speaking at this stage, they don't actually apply to what we're doing in Mojaloop. What we've done is, firstly, we have agreed that wherever possible, international standards be used. In particular, we'll use KMIP, which is Key Management Interoperability Protocol, for connecting the key management systems so that we can open up the system to as many different key management systems that there are. I think any decent key management system now will implement KMIP. For a lot of the signing, verifying of transactions, we'll try and use PKCS11 as much as possible. Where we can't, we will use the proprietary methods of HSMs. What we've also done in this PI is we've developed a TPS calculation model, very customizable to each and every implementation, where you know, well, I'm doing so many transfers, I'm going to be doing so many quotes, so many LPS transactions, and from there we hopefully be able to come up with a size of security functions you'll need to be able to do per second. And then lastly, what we did was we have done a high level design of what the cryptographic processing module, CPM for short, will look like, but it's a very architectural model without any diving down into any of the, well, this is the message format, these are the comms between, and that type of thing. It is under review at the moment. We are going before the DA committee, I think, early August, just to get final approval. And once that's done, we will start moving forward into a low-level design, so we will actually start implementing, being able to go through. Here is basically a representation of what we're trying to do. Only the bits that are inside the cryptographic eco state are bits I'm going to be concentrating on. Anything else, the Mojaloop instance that's running, what I call the independent key management systems, or if you need to send commands to it, none of that we will actually be concentrating at the moment. As you can see, the Mojaloop instance will only connect to the cryptographic processing module. Nothing else will connect to that. By keeping it very modular, we are hoping to reduce any impact any outside system can have. And as you can see, mainly on the right-hand side, we've got our HSM adapters, and on the right-hand side, the key management adapter and a command adapter. I'll start off with how we are going about the HSM adapters. There are many hardware HSMs out there at the moment. Some adhere to the international standards, depending on what you're trying to do. Some have proprietary standards. And to a very large extent, it depends on the area you are in the world as to what hardware is normally in use. At the moment, we are dealing mainly in West Africa and East Africa at the moment. So there are two main hardware HSM providers in those areas. The moment we start expanding into areas like Asia, America, especially South America, that will increase. So by having everything as an adapter to talk to your specific HSMs, it means we will be able to introduce a new HSM relatively quickly with hopefully no impact to anything else we're busy running at the moment. You'll see at the bottom what I have actually included is a software HSM adapter. A lot of that is for Mojaloop at the moment does all of its security needs in software. And there are certain instances where that will be carry on to be acceptable, especially around a test system where, let's face it, the hardware security modules are not cheap. So by allowing us to, the system to still have software, we can cut down on the cost of a testing infrastructure. And even once we've gone into a production, there might be some smaller Mojaloop instances where it might not actually be cost effective to put in a hardware solution, especially if they're only doing certain transactions. There are certain transactions which we will not allow to be done in software. And a lot of that is round about when we start talking to a lot of your legacy payment systems where they are very much controlled by PCI DSS and PCI HSM, where software is just not allowed. They would actually lose some of their processing licenses if they tried to implement software. So by putting in the hardware HSMs through adapters, I'm hoping to reduce any impact on the outside world on the cryptographic processing module. Then on the right-hand side, we're going to start off with a single independent key management system adapter, which will adhere to the KMIP standard. And by doing that, we will open this system up to many key management systems. Apart from opening up to a key management system to get any new keys and storage of keys, we will actually store a copy of the keys internally in a database. They will all be encrypted, so nothing will be at risk. And why that is, if at startup, for whatever reason, the key management system is not available, we will still be able to process. Most of your keys will change once a month, once a year. So we can be fairly sure that any keys we have would still be fairly present, would still be, can still be used. And then the last thing I've put in here is what we call a command adapter. There might be reasons where you want to send a command to the cryptographic processing module. It could be a simple thing like, we're going down for maintenance, please close your system in an orderly fashion. Most key management systems will update you as soon as there is a new key, but there might be some out there which you might generate new keys, and it could be your own, you generate them in a database, keep them in a database. So you will use the command adapter to tell the cryptographic module, I've changed my keys, please go refresh all my keys. So we have tried to make this as modular as possible. Okay, next one, please, Godfrey. And I'll try and finish off here quite quickly. Again, with the touch points, the cryptographic processing module will, in fact, affect any Mojaloop API out there, but we are restricting it to pure the Mojaloop API so that we won't interfere too much with it. And that the HSM adapters and the IKMS adapters will only interface and be applicable to the CPM itself. And as with everything else, we are trying to stick to the best practice for whatever standard we are trying to adhere to. Our next steps will be, once everything is approved, to go into a low-level design for this, and hopefully by the end of the next PI actually have the low-level PI. Godfrey, I think in closing, the targets are probably best for you.
Yes.
Thanks, Max, for that. And for the sake of time, Simeon, I'll skip this, and we will have breakup session throughout tomorrow to really, discuss this openly with anyone interested.
Thanks so much, Godfrey. Excellent. Thanks so much, Godfrey, Lewis, and Max. We're down to our break, and just so that we can help catch up with time, we'll have a 5-minute break, and I'll give you a 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 20 minutes to the hour. And we will start off with the PISP session led by Lewis and JJ. So 20 minutes to the hour, in about 5 minutes time, we'll be back. Thanks, everyone.